So we have, as you guys know, hopefully many of you guys have been to some of the past STEM Awards nights. We always have scientists come give a keynote speech, and it's really exciting for us to be able to have local scientists who have either trained here or who work here be able to come closer to our STEM community, to our schools and the students and us professionals as well. And so tonight is no different. We have our keynote. Let me, as you guys saw up there, he doesn't necessarily look like the picture I've been passing around, so I didn't recognize him when he walked in the door. But I have a brief introduction here for our keynote, Dr. Jut Wynne. Jut Wynne is a conservation biologist who has bushwhacked through the jungles of Belize, rappelled into the deepest volcanic pit in the Big Island of Hawaii, endured the world's driest desert in northern Chile, used cutting-edge instruments on board NASA aircraft, and has traveled to the most remote inhabited place on Earth, Rapa Nui, Easter Island, just to learn more about caves and the secrets they contain. With training in wildlife ecology, entomology, habitat modeling, and remote sensing, Jut is passionate about his field of study. And Jut is also an NAU alum. Please welcome Dr. Jut Wynne.
Thank you so much. As a scientist, I clearly recognize the importance of the STEM program. But I'm also an avocational musician and poet. So I also see the value in the humanities. Both are equally important in my opinion. And both are equally important in providing our children with a well-rounded education. That's why I selected this topic. To me, imagination and creativity in science underscores the importance of scientists as thinkers, as creative thinkers, those who think outside of the box. And when I thought about writing this talk, I could not think of a better example of someone who exemplifies both creativity, elegance, as well as science, as Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein once said, "I am enough of an artist to draw freely upon my imagination. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world." Now that certainly wasn't a statement made by your stereotypical stodgy scientist in a white lab coat. This was made by a dynamic thinker, a gentle and playful soul, and inarguably one of the most influential scientists of the last 100 years. Even after his death in 1955, the legacy of Albert Einstein as scientist and personality has continued to inspire researchers and influence American pop culture. When he was alive and well into beyond his death, Einstein was and still is a rock star. Now, I've thought nearly inexorably about this quote, this notion that came so naturally to Albert Einstein in 1929. I've spoken with colleagues and friends about this, and I've even approached random folks in coffee shops and struck up conversations with them about that. Might have spoken with some of you all, I don't know. I really wanted to get to the underpinning meaning of what he was trying to say, and I thought about it, I dissected his words, and I viewed them from various angles. I have little doubt that imagination is indeed essential when it comes to making contributions, novel contributions, to both the physical and natural world, and to humanity in general. Through my work and through some examples that I've borrowed from history, I wish to delve deeper into this idea philosophically. Which is more important, imagination or knowledge? Through my talk this evening, I'm hopeful that I will at least prompt some of you all to think about this a little bit more, and maybe even inspire you all to debate this amongst yourselves. What is the role of imagination and creativity in science? But first, I would like to provide you guys with my background. I want to show you where I'm coming from. I would like to provide you with a glimpse into my world, the fascinating world of cave biology, and share with you all some of the recent discoveries that we have made over the past decade. Because caves occur in virtually every continent and on most islands around the globe, this has enabled me to travel the world. To date, I've conducted cave biology studies in Belize, Central America, throughout the American Southwest, and on the island of Easter Island, also known as Rapa Nui. Caves don't give up their secrets easy. I've been charged with prying a few of those secrets from them, and in so doing, sharing them with the world. My research is focused upon understanding cave-dwelling arthropod communities, how these communities are assembled and why, and studying the environmental properties that give rise to caves that have high biological diversity. To date, colleagues and I have identified at least 50 new species of cave-dwelling arthropods from both the American Southwest and Easter Island. 29 of those are featured here. Through this work, we have formally named and described several new species. Many of them are cave-adapted animals. Now, there are two primary types of cave-adapted animals, the first of which is a troglobite. A troglobite is typically depigmented. It's this yellowish, whitish color, has elongated appendages and antennae, is often eyeless or has reduced eyes, and is covered in hair or setae. Now, this is a terrestrial animal, and a stagobite is simply its aquatic counterpart. These animals inhabit the deepest parts of caves. These cave-adapted animals carve out an existence in complete darkness and in often nutrient-limited environments. Many of these animals are relics from climates long past, and they carve out an existence in the novel nooks and crannies of the subterranean world. Typically, these animals are among the most charismatic of cave dwellers. It is these animals that are often of greatest management concern to conservation biologists. Now I'd like to share with you all two examples. The first of which are two species representing a new genus of millipede from North and South Rim Grand Canyon. This is the animal from South Rim Grand Canyon. It is known to occur in one cave. This one is from North Rim Grand Canyon, and it is known to occur in 3 caves. 1 cave to 3 caves. So you know that they don't occur in a lot of places. They have a very narrow range. And because of that, these animals are very important to conservation biologists. My second example are pseudoscorpions. Now, pseudoscorpions are neat little animals. They're about 1/4 of an inch in length. And as the name implies, they're pseudoscorpions. They're not real scorpions. Their venom sacs are in their pinchers. And that's how they capture their prey, and then they envenomate them. We have 2 new species from North Rim Grand Canyon. These 2 new species occur in just 1 cave. And I've been studying caves up there since 2005, and we haven't found them anywhere else. This animal and the cave that it occurs within are very important to land managers up there, and the cave has now been closed to recreational use, and you can only go into that cave if you have a valid research reason and a permit, or if you're administrative personnel and you have a valid reason for entering that cave. There's another arm to my research, and that is developing techniques to detect caves here on Earth and then applying those techniques to looking for caves on Mars. And we're doing that through the use of thermal imagery. And this is an example of a thermal image here that we took from the Mojave Desert. And through this work, I've been working with NASA researchers and other planetary scientists, and we've been studying caves in the Atacama Desert of northern Chile, the Mojave Desert of southern California, and the Ka'u Desert on the Big Island of Hawaii. We've collected thermal imagery by conducting 3 NASA missions on board aircraft so that we can better be able to detect caves, and we've even collected thermal imagery from a hot air balloon platform. Colleagues have just recently identified up to 2,000 cave-like features on the Martian surface. Now, this is part of a discovery paper of which I was a co-author for on identifying the first 7 of those cave-like features. And the reason why caves on Mars are so important. Oh, man. It's like telling the punchline of a joke first and then trying to back up and then, gosh, technology. Jeez. All right, well, okay, pretend you didn't see it. The reason why caves on Mars are so important is because the surface is very inhospitable. It's subjected to meteor impacts, extreme temperature fluctuations, violent windstorms, and is bombarded with cosmic radiation. So if life existed or exists on Mars, we're going to find it underground. Thank you. Thank you. While we don't anticipate finding Marvin or some large animal something running across the frame of a camera, it's most likely that that evidence would be microbial, if life ever existed on Mars. And this is what we're going to be using most likely, or a rover similar to this one, once we go into a Martian cave. This is a prototype rover. This is the world's first rock climbing robot. And I was working with NASA JPL engineers last March to field test this robot. And as it turned out, I was the first human to belay a robot on rope. Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool too. So I shared this with a friend of mine in the Explorers Club. And he had this very blasé response. He was like, well, I'll be impressed when it's the other way around. And little did he know that he was actually onto something. In February, I'm going to be working with spacesuit designers to field test both mechanical and motorized rope climbing equipment while wearing a pressurized spacesuit. This is going to be part of identifying a toolkit for astronauts that they can use so they can live and work efficiently underground. Because much like looking for life, the best place is going to be underground. For humans, setting up either temporary or permanent astronaut shelters, the best place for them to live is going to be underground as well, because of those hostile surface conditions. So who knows? Maybe one day, this guy at the other end of that rope as he's rappelling in could very well be a robot. Over the years, I've learned the importance of both imagination, creativity, and knowledge. To me, I've come to view knowledge and creativity as in terms of a symbiotic relationship. One feeds off of one another. I believe they're equally important. I sure wish that I had the opportunity to sit down and chat with Albert Einstein about this, to bend his ear and to have this debate. But given that that is not possible, I had to settle for the next best thing. So I wrote him a letter. One that he'll never read, obviously, but one that I would like to share with you all tonight. Dear Albert, may I call you Albert? Given your contributions to theoretical physics and your place in American pop culture, as well as my research into your life and philosophy, I feel like I know you well enough to call you Albert. I'm writing you to share my thoughts on imagination versus knowledge in science. Given nearly 60 years has passed since you left us, a collegial exchange of written correspondence on the subject is, well, impossible. I recognize that imagination is the angelic notes from which creative symphonies are written. Upon further examination of the idea that imagination is more important than knowledge, I've come to a slightly different conclusion. I believe that imagination is as important as knowledge. I have read broadly your musings about imagination and knowledge. In addition to your contributions to science, I believe that your thoughts on this subject have greatly benefited society. At a minimum, the ideas have given many of us cause to reflect upon how we are, or how we should be, educating our children. It is those future generations who will ultimately fill the ranks of the nation's workforce. I am an ecologist, and I have devoted my life to the study of caves. I discovered it was through knowledge that I was able to make and develop creative, yet logical explanations for what I was observing or planning to model in nature. I would like to share some examples with you. Through my work on Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, colleagues and I have identified at least 10 new species of cave-dwelling arthropods. All of these animals are believed to now be restricted to the fern moss gardens that occur within entrances and beneath skylights of caves. Due to intensive human land use by the ancient Polynesians, inauspiciously timed with an extended drought period, a catastrophic ecological shift occurred on the island. And what happened was it shifted from this palm-dominated scrub forest to a grassland. When that happened, I believe these animals were simply stuck in the caves. 2 of these animals were known from other Polynesian islands. So I wanted to figure out exactly how these animals got to Rapa Nui and perhaps dispersed across Polynesia. So using my knowledge as a scientist, I wanted to examine how this was possible. There are 3 primary mechanisms, the first of which is wind currents. Animals remaining aloft for an extended period of time, ultimately landing on an island or another landmass. Well, we have two of these animals here. One is a columbella or springtail, the other is an isopod or pill bug. And there are no known examples in the aerial plankton for long-distance dispersing columbella or springtails. So that wasn't a possibility. The second possibility was foracy. Could these animals have hitchhiked on a pelagic bird and gone from one island to the next? Well, unfortunately, there are no known examples of foracy for either columbella or isopods. What about rafting? A storm happens, a big log is knocked out by heavy waves into the ocean, and on that, these animals are clinging on and they raft across the ocean and make landfall in Rapa Nui. That seemed like a logical explanation. So we looked at an oceanic currents map, and our first animal is known from Hawaii and Rapa Nui, and that is our springtail. Over 7,000 kilometers of open ocean exists between those two landmasses. But more importantly, the prevailing cross currents that occur along the equator would make it most unlikely that that animal would be able to reach Rapa Nui from Hawaii. Our second animal, the pill bug, occurs on both Rapa Iti in the Austral Islands and Rapa Nui. Over 30,000 kilometers exist between those two island masses. While the South Pacific gyre does spiral in the general direction of Rapa Nui, given that Rapa Nui is a 63 square mile island speck of rock in the middle of the South Pacific, this explanation seemed unlikely as well. We suggested that the ancient Polynesian navigators dispersed these animals, and we have proposed the canoe bug hypothesis. We know that the ancient Polynesians would take plants with them that they would want to introduce to the next island that they arrived at. Taro, for example. It was through my knowledge of Polynesian culture and history that I was able to develop and put forward this canoe bug hypothesis. We felt so confident about this canoe bug hypothesis that we actually named one of the animals, which is a new species, Manu Vaca, which is Rapa Nui for bug of the canoe. My second example is modeling hibernating bat habitat, in particular, hibernating cave bat habitat. And we've been doing this work throughout the American Southwest. The reason why this is so important is because of the westward advance of a disease called white nose syndrome, which has been responsible for at least 5 million bat mortalities, according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It attacks the bat while it is hibernating, when it is weakest. It has shut down its metabolism. It causes it to burn through its fat reserves, and as a result, the animal exits the cave searching for food. Unsuccessful, it perishes. We wanted to get a better grasp on habitat for bats so that we could hopefully be able to identify those habitat requirements of bats in hopes that we might be able to learn something that might help us when white nose syndrome ultimately reaches the front doorstep of Arizona. So using my knowledge of geographical information systems, we developed three-dimensional models of climate and bat locations to do this. The first data set was three-dimensional bat locations where we basically mapped where they were occurring on the walls and ceilings. We then deployed a large number of temperature and relative humidity instruments and collected a year's worth of data that was collected hourly. And then we collected data to develop these three-dimensional maps. From that, we were able to create these interpolative maps of temperature and relative humidity. And by interpolative, I mean we know two locations. We know where instrument A is and instrument B, and we know the temperatures of both of those. But we don't know the values between those two locations, so we use an algorithm to estimate those. And this is an example here. I would also like to borrow two examples from history to illustrate why I believe that imagination is as important as knowledge. The first is Michelangelo. Michelangelo's David to this day remains one of the most remarkable statues ever created. Would this work of art have become so strikingly impressive and timeless had it not been for Michelangelo's knowledge and his acquisition of knowledge. Michelangelo is known to have conducted numerous human autopsies where he was able to study human musculature so he could obtain a better understanding of human anatomy. I suggest it was through his understanding of human anatomy that he was able to create such a masterpiece. My second example is Michael Faraday. He was a creative genius. He was a physicist and chemist, and you actually kept a picture of him on your study wall. I would suggest that it was his creativity and experimentation which was derived from the knowledge that he had gathered over the years through keen observations and careful experimentation. Following nearly 2 decades of study on magnetism and electricity, his work led to the development of the world's first electric generator, and that occurred in 1831. It was through his understanding of physics that led him to this earth-shattering discovery and heralded the Industrial Revolution. The ability to draw creative conclusions from what one knows or observes are the cobbled stones on the path of discovery. The ability through knowledge to creatively explain a given phenomena is, in my humble opinion, what makes imagination limitless. Also, collective knowledge bases housed in our minds of the individual contribute greatly to one's ability to both formulate ideas and to creatively solve problems. These disparate knowledge bases, in aggregate, are what psychologists refer to as cognitive complexity. High cognitive complexity facilitates a greater imaginative ability and problem-solving ability, much better than or much higher than one with low cognitive complexity. Unlike the prisoners of Plato's cave whose perceptions were shaped by only firelight and the shadows cast upon the wall in front of them, a person with high cognitive complexity uses multiple knowledge bases for generating ideas and solving problems. I find you to be a wonderful example of one with high cognitive complexity. Your cultural perceptions were shaped by your Jewish, German heritage and through being an American citizen. You were an accomplished sailor and navigator. You were a musician who loved to play the violin and piano. And of course, you were a world-renowned scientist and thinker. According to the proponents of cognitive complexity, all of these knowledge bases contributed to your ability to make such great and significant contributions. Another example of high cognitive complexity is one of my heroes, Thomas Jefferson, 3rd President of the United States. Although he often referred to himself as just a farmer, he was light years beyond the average farmer of his time. He was an inventor, an architect, a talented writer. He was proficient in 6 languages. He too played the violin. He was a skillful diplomat as well. By serving as a primary author on the Declaration of Independence, he ushered in the Revolutionary War and played a pivotal role in the formation of the United States. Few in American history can rival the contributions made through imagination, creativity, and knowledge. You once said, if I were not a physicist, I would probably be a musician. I often think in music. I live my daydreams in music. I see my life in terms of music. You and I share a similar passion for music. I too am a musician, and I consider myself to be somewhat of a poet. So regardless of where you and I fall in what I'm referring to as the knowledge creativity continuum, I would like to share an idea with you that I think we will most likely agree upon. I believe that teaching our children in a manner that provides them with multiple knowledge bases is critically important. Our children must excel in science and math, but they should also be equally learned in the humanities. In 1993, the National Science Foundation developed the STEM program, which stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics. The goal of STEM was to improve the nation's math and science proficiencies in public schools. In so doing, the United States would remain competitive in the global theater and continue to lead the charge in scientific breakthroughs and discoveries. While I certainly applaud the efforts of this program, competency in STEM subjects is not enough. Among other things, success is measured by our ability to apply knowledge in creative ways and to solve problems creatively as well. We must inspire our future leaders, scientists, and teachers to think creatively. This is best done by exposing them to the creative world. To do this, STEM desperately needs a sibling. Perhaps it could be called MALT, which would stand for music, art, literature, and theater. Alas, the humanities are dramatically underfunded, and I don't expect that's going to change anytime soon. So a STEM sibling may only be wishful thinking. Regardless, I maintain by providing school students with a classical education rooted in both STEM and what I'm referring to as MALT, they would receive the building blocks necessary to develop high cognitive complexity. Knowledge is the cocoon-clad pupa from which the imaginative butterfly may emerge. Through the development of multiple knowledge bases, our future leaders, teachers, and scientists would have multifarious avenues from which to nurture their creativity and solve problems creatively. Such an education would place them firmly at the intersection of knowledge and imagination, the most wondrous place a reaching mind could ever wish to be. Your colleague across space-time, Jut Wynne. Thank you all very much.
Answer some questions?
Sure, I can do that.
So we have time for just a couple of questions. If anybody has a question, I know I have many, but I will bug Jut later. Bug Jut later. And while you guys are thinking, let me go ahead and ask Jut one quick question. Jut, with all the caves that you've been around the world, what was the coolest cave you've ever been in?
Wow, I get this question asked to me a lot. Which is the coolest cave I've ever been in? And I typically just say all of them, because the beauty of caves is that no matter how often you go into a cave, you can go into a cave 100 times, and you will always see something new or different. You might all of a sudden notice there's a archaeological artifact that you've walked over hundreds of times in the past, and there it is all of a sudden right in front of you. Or you might encounter a rattlesnake in the cave, which you hadn't seen prior. So yeah, it's really hard. Every time in a cave is a new adventure.
Great. Any other questions? Juji has a, great, back here. Brandon, we have a microphone.
Hey, that's a great talk. Thank you very much. I was just curious, your feeling on curiosity. I would think that where I was saying with knowledge as well as imagination. Curiosity, where does that stand? Well, I don't see it as the same thing as creativity or imagination. Just how do you foster curiosity? And, to get where you are today, I think you have to be very curious about the world and caves.
I think the best thing, especially for the younger folks out here, is don't grow up. Keep that curiosity alive. Always question everything. And never just settle for, oh, that's the way it is? Okay, I'll accept it. No. Always question. Always try to figure out why. So yeah, maintain that childlike curiosity, and that's what I would recommend, because, I mean, I haven't grown up. I get paid to play in caves. I mean, good grief. Who could ask for a better gig?
Any other questions? No? Everybody wants to
All right.
show Jut.
Okay, no worries. Thank you very much once again, y'all. Take care. Thank you, David.